Thanks for joining me for another Facebook Live. We're getting near the deadline and a lot of very hot topics under discussion, and one of the issues that we are spending a lot of time talking about as we try to get to a budget and engage some reform here in Springfield, one of the issues that we're talking about is education funding reform. So I asked one of my colleagues, who I work a lot with on education issues, but he's really taken the lead on putting forward a legislation to radically change how we fund education here in Illinois. So joining me today is my good friend Senator Jason Barickman. And
good
welcome.
to be here.
Thanks.
Radically changing. I like the
well,
yeah, good.
Yeah. I mean,
doing big things down here, right?
Yes. And matter of fact, we just had a hearing last week and compared your bill to another one. But before we get into the sort of the political dynamic, it's the evidence-based model that we're talking about. So explain to folks.
Yeah, evidence-based model. So there's always been a question about the way in which Illinois distributes. It's some $6 to $7 billion that is distributed to 850 school districts. And so what I've proposed is that we model the way we distribute that money on evidence. Basically the data and the best practices, all as studied by the education community. It's kind of like the Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. So what we do is we look at what those optimal environments are for educating our kids. I mean, ultimately the hope is to provide them an environment where they can be successful and compete in this world-class economy that we have. So we look at that environment, and then we back in the data that will hopefully create that environment. It's 27 elements. It looks at things like technology and class size, but all of this data gives us confidence that we're going to be putting the resources where they're needed the most. And I think it really gives taxpayers a different perspective on the way in which we budget for our schools. I mean, how many times have we heard people say, where's this money going? At least within the school budget, the hope is that we can say these resources, the limited resources taxpayers give us, are following the data to get to the places where they're most needed are going to have the highest impact on the environment that we learn in.
Right, which is something we totally do not have right now in the way we fund education.
Yeah, the way we go about it today is totally arbitrary. You know, how many, we've sat in these budget hearings where someone comes in and they may say, we want to spend more money or we want to spend less money in schools, and we sit around and we say, well, if we spend more or less, what do we get from that? What's the investment that taxpayers get? I think this lets us quantify that in a much better way, and hopefully again gives assurances to people at home that we're not just making arbitrary decisions with how to spend their money. We're doing data-driven decisions.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of excitement here in the General Assembly about the proposal because, as we said in the past, it's been like throwing a dart at the board. You never know if the financial investment, we come up with more dollars, is it really being spent wisely? So you and I have been working on this issue.
Long time.
Long time. You longer than I. And so about a year ago, the governor formed the Education Funding Reform Commission, of which you and I sat on, and that's really where the evidence-based model really began to take shape. You had been talking about it.
It got its legs, though, once we all sat in the table and put everyone together and said, what are we all talking about? I think it really got its legs then.
Yeah, it really did. And I think that we were all able to wrap our arms around what is an evidence-based model and why is this a good idea. So since then, we produced a report, and we now have a number of bills. So Will Davis, Representative Davis over in the House has a bill. You have your bill. Senator Menard has a bill. Can you talk a little bit about what the differences are about what's going on in the House and the difference between yours and Senator Menard's?
Yeah, and so just the brief kind of to the historical component here. 2 years ago, when the first evidence-based bill was introduced, I introduced the first evidence-based bill 2 years ago. We couldn't get a hearing. I mean, it was one of many ideas about how to reform the school funding system. And so fast forward to now, the other ideas have really been, I guess I'd say it this way, there's been a lot of coalescing around the evidence model today.
I would agree.
So much so that you look at what Representative Davis and others have proposed, and they embrace the evidence-based model. Something that I believe is very significant in the notion that both Republicans and Democrats are saying this is a good way in which to approach funding our schools. Now that isn't to say that we're at the finish line here. We do have some very big, differences of opinion here. And there are choices that I think the legislature is faced with in the coming weeks here. It's things like, how are we going to treat the very controversial Chicago block grant that today benefits the Chicago public school system some $250 million.
And speaking of that,
Yeah.
Explain the Chicago block grant, because here in this building we all know what that is, but a lot of the folks who are watching right now have no idea what you're talking about. And you're right, it's very controversial.
Yeah, so, years before you or I were in the legislature, the laws were changed to say that for certain pots of money, for things like special education and other areas, Chicago would be treated than every other district in the state. Again, there's 850 some of them. And the way the law reads, it was changed years ago, and the way it reads today is it says, with those special pots of money, we're going to take off the top and give to Chicago an allotment of dollars that exceeds their fair share if they were treated like every other school district. And so it's not that, and so there's a lot of people who say that's unfair, that's taking money away from all the other school districts, and that should be done away with, the block grant. So how we deal with that $250 million block grant is a key decision for the legislature as we reform the funding formula.
Yeah, and we're really struggling with it, because there are obviously two sides to that, and there are a lot of other moving pieces in this conversation. And to go back to your explanation about the differences in the bill, one of the other pieces that we think is important when we talk about what to do about the Chicago block grant, and that's mandate relief. Can you talk a little bit about what the differences are and how we look at that versus some of the other proposals?
Yeah, as you think about the notion that we need to create a single funding stream for the schools, or a formula for all schools around the state. The reality is, we know some school districts rely more heavily on the state than others. A lot of school districts, especially in our suburban areas, but not just there, are much more reliant on property taxpayers.
Absolutely.
So voters and taxpayers who come to this aren't necessarily looking at the funding formula as a mechanism to drive more resources to their districts, but they're looking for us to create more flexibility, give relief from the hundreds of unfunded mandates that are placed on school districts. And so what I've proposed is that as we rewrite the formula, we also produce some very significant mandate relief, give schools more flexibility. When you give schools more flexibility, they can make choices of how to spend their dollars. Hopefully they can push their costs down.
Right.
That can create, whether it's lower expenses, property tax relief, or what have you. I have always thought that if we rewrite the formula, we also need to do some significant mandate relief. That's why we've included it with our effort. You don't see that mandate relief existing in the Democrat proposal here. And it draws a clear line in the sand of a difference of opinion of how the two sides are trying to tackle this issue.
And one of the things a lot of people don't understand is that in Chicago, CPS, Chicago Public School System, has some of the very mandate relief of flexibility that we're looking for. If it's good enough for CPS, why can't the rest of the school districts in the state have the same thing?
Yeah, it's one of the most interesting pieces of the legislation we do is, if you look at the school code, we won't look at the school code obviously, but if you looked at the school code, you'll find a provision in there that says for CPS, CPS can do all these things. More flexibility, more control over management and personnel decisions.
Third-party contracting.
Third-party contracting. So what we've said is we don't want to take those measures away from CPS. We simply want to strike the limitation in the law that says that's only available to CPS and apply those measures to every other school district if they choose to have those flexibility measures, third-party contracting mechanisms available to those schools.
And those really are the core issues that we are debating over. It's a very civil debate, but we are having a very spirited discussion about how we're going to address the block grant and the mandate relief and the things to try to get true balance in the state and at the same time provide an adequate education for all kids across the state. Because we do know that, you know, there's a lot of kids who are at the poverty line in the city of Chicago, but there are a lot of kids throughout the state who have the same sort of additional challenges, and they're not getting the same dollars as the kids in Chicago.
Yeah, I mean, this is the interesting part about the evidence and the data that we use. If you follow the evidence, there's 150 or more public school districts who are considered on the data to be poorer than Chicago. So I think a lot of us come to this debate with the notion that we don't want to be punitive to CPS. We simply want to create a fair system for all our kids, no matter where they go to school. You're right. We've had some very spirited debates, you know, on the block grant, on mandate relief. I think the hope here, as we approach the end of May, the hope here is that we can find some common ground. I think it's there. You know, that possibility exists, but we need to have a willing dance partner. You know, someone who's willing to come meet us in the middle on these issues, and if we can, I think we get some real success.
Well, you've been the lead on this. Your bill is the bill that we hold up as this is where we want to be, and you're right. We are very close at this particular point. When you look at the total picture because of issues that we're dealing with, because we have budget concerns that we're trying to deal with at the same time. We're trying to put more money into education while we balance a budget. But we also have some other reform initiatives that our governor and Republicans are advocating for. You know, what's in your crystal ball? What do you think happens here?
Well, you know, I've often said my hope is cooler heads prevail and that we get to a resolution. I don't know. It's every morning you wake up around here and you say maybe this is the day where something good happens.
Yeah, we do.
But you know, I think you know, obviously everyone at home is frustrated. I think we're all frustrated around
Absolutely.
here. But you look at the gravity of the situation and the importance in us in these negotiations getting it right. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Right.
But I think we have to put forward a common sense bipartisan resolution that is sellable to the people at home who ultimately have sent us here to do a job. They didn't ask us to come down here and lay down and play dead. They asked us to advocate for their concerns.
And those same people have said to us, make changes about how you run this state or we're leaving.
Mm-hmm. And they are leaving.
They are leaving, and so are our businesses. So education is just one piece of a very complex situation where we're trying to balance, you know, getting things like quality education for our children and at the same time making Illinois a good place to do business, because really to get out of our financial woes, let's grow our economy.
Got to grow the economy. I mean, you know, anyone would tell you that economic growth and the need for economic growth is what is going to allow us an opportunity to really provide for high-quality school systems, to provide an environment where our kids and grandkids have a place to stay and work. I mean, these are obviously big issues, but we're here in Illinois. We're at the front of the line of we've got to address these issues.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks for joining me this morning.
It's been fun.
It has been. Did I leave anything out on the
You
education?
forgot the coffee.
Oh, I forgot the coffee. All right. Well, next time I will make sure that we have coffee. So thank you for joining Senator Jason Barickman and myself, Senator Karen McConnaughay, for a Facebook Live conversation about education funding. Thanks.